Trinkets in Season 3 seem like they're going to be really interesting. I'm really excited to see what ends up happening with them because there's a lot of really good trinkets in the game now. And so one of the big ones was the ticking sack. Okay, this was something that was really valuable in a raiding situation as a Blood DK, and they did nerf this on the PTR. So they had nerfed a few trinkets already on the PTR, but now that they're continuing to nerf more through hot fixes. So you might have missed some of these. Like I was personally kind of away from the game those last few days while we were waiting for the patch, and I kind of missed them too. And I come back and read through it all, and I'm seeing all kinds of nerfs. So this trinket is probably one of the most interesting ones, honestly. But they had already changed it at this point, I guess, but it was turned from this like really janky cheat death to like a proper cheat death, like the Splintered Heart of Alar or whatever that was called. And so it was a much more like, you know, people were all of a sudden really interested in getting it. And it was a 6-minute cooldown because of the old way it worked, but then they changed it to an 8-minute cooldown. 8 minutes, pretty long time, but I think a lot of people who use that in 5-mans are just like, if that procs twice in the dungeon, we got what we wanted out of it. And I could see why you'd feel that way. And so I got it at the last week of the season as well, so maybe we'll try it out if we're having some trouble. It's always nice to have something like that because the only other option is a talent, and that's Purgatory. And on top of Red Thirst, you know, I can't really see myself ever using Purgatory right now. So it might be good to have that trinket. You know, you could realistically, like, you know, trinkets aren't that big of a deal. But another one they nerfed was Soli's Secret Technique. Now, this is one that I've heard a lot of Blood DK saying they're actually going to use. And frankly, not exactly sure why. I guess it's just kind of over budgeted, but you know, I guess it's also just because of, you know, secondary stats kind of getting overpowered at the end of the expansion. But it seems, yeah, they nerfed it a lot, actually, I'm pretty sure. 10% nerf. Oh, yeah, okay. So, no, actually, you know, it's not a lot. And that's kind of the theme of these discussion here, because it's like they nerfed a lot of trinkets a little bit. And, you know, they actually say about that in the final post we're going to read here. But, you know, see a lot of people here saying Soli's Trinket was BIS for most players due to the big stats without any turnbacks, which I don't think is a word. But yeah, 10% nerf to that. I mean, I guess not really that big of a deal, you know. But you know, so the question about that type of trinket, it's like, what does that look like at the max item level? And I don't know if anybody even on the PTR would know that. I don't know how, you know, people played it, but you'd have to get the trinket somehow. Maybe you can buy it from a vendor. I don't know. But these were the big ones for me. And this actually happened last Friday. A lot of people probably missed this, but this was these were big ones. And like I said about ticking sack, it was like file and ticking sack. They were like really crushing it, and both were a little bit overpowered, to be honest, like compared to their other competition. And file has been this way since season 1. Like, I mean, it should have been nerfed in Castle Nathria, to be honest. Like, it was clearly the best raid trinket. Everybody who was playing a tank used it, and it's just it's just how it works. Like, it was just really good compared to every other 5-man trinket. So, but they nerfed this by 15%. So these both are pretty heavy. Like, this is a big nerf to file putrefaction. And honestly, even though it was kind of a head above the others, it wasn't really that good. Like, there's been trinkets in the past that were like my top damage. Like, I remember in BFA that freaking weapon from whatever that raid was with the 2 bosses. That weapon was like my top damage. You know what I mean? So it's like, this trinket is like 10th. Like, it's not very good, to be honest, for what we've expected throughout the years. So I'm not really sure why they're not just tuning things differently. But the big one that kind of hurts me is blood spattered scale. So even though we didn't really use this a lot in the beginning of season 2, I did start using it again at the end of season 2, and I have to say I remembered why I love this trinket. It's such a nice like threat. Like, it's just such a big burst of threat that it really, and then you also have this big absorb too. So it's like everything I need to do as a tank: get threat, survive. The blood barrier covers it, and it's so big for Blood DK, especially because if you can use it at the start of a pull, which is when you need the threat the most, you also need the survivability the most there. And it's like, my god, that's the perfect time. It's a 2-minute cooldown though, so I mean, it lines up pretty well with some of our other CDs. Now with Dancing Rune Weapon obviously being such a short CD, it's kind of be, you know, maybe a little bit harder to use or think about when you want to use it. But I like this. I love this trinket. I always have. It honestly saved me, not the character, but me. It saved me so big in season 1. Like, I was thinking, like, man, I can't even play this tank anymore back when, like, the kite meta was running rampant. And it was so nice to have that trinket, man. It felt really good. But then, you know, in season 2, there was a better trinket from the raid. And I see another trinket in the raid that I want to talk about here in a bit. But it makes me think that now that this has been nerfed, we might end up seeing that raid trinket as one of the better options. The thing about this trinket, though, is that you can get this potentially really lucky if you get it from the cache, right? And it would be obviously a mythic version, which I certainly won't be getting a mythic version of the other trinket we're talking about, but I'm sure a lot of people will be. And so, I think probably a mythic blood barrier is probably still going to be better than this raid trinket, and just because of the damage it does, but we'll see. But then just recently they posted these. Okay, so this was actually like they had a conversation about this. So let's read this. Soulletting Ruby, critical strike rating granted reduced by 15%. So this is not a trinket, obviously, that tank will use, but it's a really coveted trinket. And there was actually a guy that I used to play with. He was like trying to get this trinket constantly, and then I got it on my no spec priest the first time I opened a box on that character. Anyway, okay, File of Putrefaction, Soulletting Ruby, and Blood Spattered Scale were part of a trifecta of dungeon trinkets that were over-budgeted enough that each new tier of item level scaling ensured that they'd become the best, if not the best trinket for the class that use them without question. Our intention here isn't to kill their viability, but give more wiggle room for situational competitors and introduce some more variance into player gearing choices across Eternity's End. Yeah, that's good. Now, they also buffed armor and damage by this trinket. This trinket was looked at as the worst trinket in the game. I think like most people like never even tried to use this. 5-minute cooldown. It's just a really bad trinket, and that's not going to change, I don't feel like. That's kind of the way I'm looking at this. Blade Dancer's armor kit wasn't provided the defensive value of promised tanks, even in situations you'd expect it to be good. So we're taking a crack at it alongside Pulsing Stoneheart to try and make it less of a negative experience when these two drop for you, and more into a place where you consider them depending on your situation and class. Yeah, so I don't think that's going to do that. I mean, honestly, a 5, it's just a shit. It's just actually a bad trinket. Like, it's really a bad trinket. It lasts for 2 minutes, and it's a 5-minute cooldown. Like, that's just such a dumb trinket idea. And 25% more, and I think that's going to be the way. So I feel like if I feel that about this, if this 25% buff to this isn't going to get me to care about this trinket, then yeah, maybe a 15% nerf to Blood Spattered Scale isn't going to get me to not want to use that trinket either. Now, they also changed Pulsating Stoneheart, which you'll know is one of the trinkets I was actually the most excited for coming off the Shadowlands beta, and then sad to find out how bad it was. Anyway, armor, health regeneration, and self-slow duration reduced to 6 seconds, was 12 seconds, but armor increased by 35%, and health regeneration lowered slightly per tick, but now ticks on use for a total of 7 times. Pulsating Stoneheart wasn't appropriately tuned against the large downside of snaring yourself for a long period of time, so we've compressed the effect to mitigate the downside and made it a much stronger burst defensive value in situations. So yeah, now it's used to last for 12 seconds. Now it's 35% more armor. So it's going to be like 400 armor. And then it's going to heal yourself for that much over every, I guess, I don't know how it ticks 7 total times. I'm not really sure how that part works. But regardless, I, again, probably still won't use this trinket. And it has nothing to do with the downside. That just doesn't matter. I mean, you're never going to really use that. Like, why would you use that and then have to kite or something? Like, that would just be dumb. Like, don't use the trinket that way. But it's just too one-dimensional, and it doesn't do enough for what it does. Like, honestly, it's just a worse trinket than... the problem with Blood Spattered Scale, and they can nerf it 50%, and it still will have the same problem, it's way too versatile. Like, you can use it in so many different situations. It could be good for offense, it could be good for defense. It even has that weird interaction where you could actually one-shot the shield from Hakar, which I honestly thought was just like a bug because the trinket came from Hakar. But yeah, anyway, there is one trinket from the raid that I just want to quickly talk about, and I'll be interested in seeing how this plays out. Let's see. I don't know what's happening here. It says trinket, but it's not showing them. But yeah, it's from the Zymox motherfucker. Yeah, here we go. Places a rift portal in front of you that charges for 3 seconds, 3 sec before unleashing a blast of a bunch of cosmic damage split up between enemies in a line. The portal plunders reality itself, granting you a shield for 20 seconds, which absorbs 32,752 damage. Oh. And damage and absorption are increased for each enemy struck. 1 minute cooldown. Now that's the big reason I want to try that. 1 minute cooldown. That's a large shield, by the way. If you compare that to this, 39,000. Now, of course, that is a 20 item level higher, basically. but it is a 1 minute cooldown. So you would expect it to be much lower than that. And considering that number, both of these numbers go up in the same way, I believe it's the exact same on that way, right? Yep, same way. This seems like it's going to be really interesting. But people are telling me it's really hard to use, and I don't really know what that means. The only thing I could think of is that you actually have to place it. It says places a rift portal in front of you. And I guess it has to, like, if one way or the other, it takes 3 seconds to charge, which that's not a long time at all. Like, that should not be an issue. But I don't know. I haven't ever used it. So if anybody has any experience with any of that stuff, let me know. For me, though, I could probably see myself using whatever the best, like, cooldown defensive trinket is. Like, I probably won't use that cheat death unless I really, really need it. Because the codex is just irreplaceable. Like, the codex is going to be absolutely insane. And the fact that they haven't nerfed that, it's hard to believe. And if you don't know what trinket I'm talking about this here. Taking damage grants you a chance to unleash the first technique for 12 seconds. 12 seconds, too. Reflecting 10% of incoming damage. This was like a 50% uptime for me, by the way, in last season. And 10% of the amount of damage you take as a Blood DK is a lot, okay, for sure. Now, I don't know how often that maximum portion plays in, but I do think that maximum portion is, it does scale with item level. So last expansion, it was like, it doesn't matter about the item level of that trinket because a 10% damage reduction for 50% of the dungeon is like insane. But the only thing item level would matter was the stamina and the other portion, which I don't know how much that mattered, but that's, you know, now you're going to be able to get that at max item level. And I don't think I've ever been more excited about a trinket, because stamina is also really nice. I really like having high stamina, so I can't wait to use that trinket. That trinket's just going to be on. I will not be taking that off in 5-man. So there's no, I can't imagine there's a circumstance I won't have that on, because it was also like my top damage. It just blew every other trinket out of the water, because when you're taking, like, you know, when you have 150k health and you're taking, like, you know, hits of like 30 and 40k constantly, and you're reflecting 10% of that damage 50% of the time, you're going to do a lot of damage with that trinket, you know what I mean? So it seems particularly strong for Blood DK, but I think it's going to be extremely good for all tanks. And then the other one would just be like, so like that's a really good passive trinket, but it's nice to have like a really good active trinket as well. And so that would probably be Blood Scattered Scale for me, but I could also see it being that one we just looked at from Zymox. And that seems like it would be pretty good too. So we'll see both of those. Those are probably the trinkets I'll use. What are you guys thinking? Like I said, I've heard people talking about using the dungeon trinket solely secret technique, but I just like 2 passive trinkets. I don't like 2 passive trinkets very often, and I don't like 2 active trinkets either. So it's probably definitely Codex and then something else. So let me know what you think, and we'll see you guys in the next one.